Okay. We're live. Yay. Okay. My first actual real live. Thank God the pro Chris Shelton is with me today. Hey, everybody, whether you're with us live or watching on the recording, I've had a lot of people go, okay, I have to work, but I'm going to be watching the recording. Wherever you are, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to do this officially I wanted to do something special for the 2-year anniversary of my book, Is This a Cult? Confronting the line between transformation and exploitation. So much has happened in those 2 years. And there is a whole second book. I had 2 people email me today and go, are you going to write a second book? I'm like, yeah, as soon as I get my house sold, get the business launched, and about 10 other things, but it's definitely coming together. But we're going to be talking about some of what's going to end up in that book here today. So I wrote a little bit of a dedication for today's show that I want to share with y'all. So my book was my story of awakening. My reaction and grappling with getting news, getting information, getting facts that really didn't fit with my picture of what my career had been about, the people I was working with. Like, it was really confronting to get, to be shown things that were just so contrary to what I thought that I was up to and what I had been about, or what I'd been a part of. So on this 2-year anniversary, I have learned so much. But today's episode, I want to dedicate to all of the former program leaders, staff, and volunteers who have shared their stories with me. Many of them from the organization I was a part of, Landmark, but many others as well, many other organizations like it. Stories of both intended and unintended harms that came from their participation. I feel it's important to share these stories, not simply because they deserve to be seen and their healing matters, but because the conversations I've had over the last 2 years with everyday people who went looking for growth, researchers, experts, doctors, lawyers, these conversations and these patterns are pervasive. And they're revealing patterns of exploitation and undue influence and harm. These patterns are happening across all kinds of groups and spaces in our society. It would be a mistake to reduce the work I'm doing and the things I'm saying to something personal, or to the misunderstood idea that I'm simply grappling with grievances or even trauma. That's an easy way to dismiss me, and you can do that if it makes you more comfortable. But I say do it at your own risk. I have had grievances. I'm sure I carry some trauma. And through this journey, all of that is healing. But this work is about so much more than that. And so me and the people I've met, and like my friend here today with me, Chris Shelton, we will keep talking until we begin to see the tide turn. We are seeing people demand facts and make noise about confronting those facts. But that's the easy part. I see it in the way people are demanding the Epstein files and truths like them to be revealed. There's this big demand, right? But again, that's the easy part. The hard part is, what are we going to do with the facts once they're revealed? Are we going to rationalize, justify, hide? Are we going to learn and do better? That is what this channel, Confronting the Line, is about. My new Patreon channel, Beyond the Line, is about the next question. What do we do about it? How do we learn? What is there to learn? And my platform, Illuminate, that we're launching, that's where my answers are going to take shape. A marketplace of practitioners who are committed to the safe and ethical practice of personal and professional development, and who are building the accountability structures, learning the lessons that this work requires, that all that is being revealed is showing us and teaching us. So today, I'm so excited. Chris said yes to joining this with me. You're the live expert. For those of you that don't know, Chris was actually one of the first people in 2020. He did an episode on his show, Sensibly Speaking Then, Now Speaking of Cults, that was all about, like, you let a former staff member of Landmark spill the beans and talk all about what it was like to be on staff. And I was so shocked because in all my searches, I had never run into that until after my book came out, and I was being, just so many people were contacting me all around the world. So Chris was talking about this long before me, not just Landmark, but as a former Scientologist with 27 years, right? Did I get that right?
That's
And
right.
many of 15 of which in the Sea Org. So
Yeah,
deep in there.
17 in the Sea Org.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what else? What
long
would you
time.
like to say, Chris, just to say hi and
Well,
get us
I've
going
just
here.
been, talking about cults and stuff. I went and got a degree in coercive control, and so I could understand it better. But really, it's just about understanding the dynamic and the relationships of what predators do to people. And there are predators out there. There are people who just dedicate their time to preying on other people, and unfortunately, we have to deal with that, whether it's in religion or sports or entertainment or politics or whatever part of life it manifests, it comes up. These people are out there and they set up these groups and these relationships, these very codependent kind of relationships. And we get stuck in them because we, get wrangled into thinking we want to be better people.
Well, we wanna be better people, and I've learned so much, you guys, from Chris, and he's been so generous with his time and, sharing. We have some exciting projects coming up together. Chris's book's gonna be coming out in about a few weeks here. It's so good, you guys. I can't wait for you to see it. With all the things that he's learned, you've just been so instrumental in how important it is to deconstruct at what happened, like how, and how to it's easy to leave the group. Well, okay, I take that back. It's not easy to leave the group, but at this point, it feels like it is because I'm like, oh my God, but what comes after that and leaving the ideas or sorting through the ideas. But you just pointed to one of the things that I think is really misunderstood, which is, first of all, nobody joins a high control group. Nobody signs up for undue influence. Nobody says, hey, coerce me, and take my agency away. I was just thinking about this on my walk this morning that mostly we give our agency away, but not knowingly.
That's right.
Chris and I have in common, we both were out to save the world. We were out to do good things and to make a difference. And we thought that those groups, Scientology for him, Landmark for me, was a way to do that. We were joining a community of people who were gonna make a difference and change the world, and we weren't dumb for that. That's what they say they're about,
Right.
and have all kinds of narratives and structures to convince you of that, and so you sign on. You sign on to be a part of that, and then you start giving your agency away because that's what it looks like to be up to something bigger than yourself. That was the language we, used in Landmark, right? Like, is me, I'm going to just, my needs, my whatnot are unimportant as compared to what's possible if this work gets into the world, right? Like, and whatever it is, whether it's a religion or it's a self help doctrine or, can be a community group. It doesn't, I worked with a yoga guru, a yoga community. They're going to get people healthy, but that's the one thing that binds us. We're there to make a difference. That's been a really, really, really big part. That's what brings us in, but that's also what holds us
Yeah,
is
for
that
sure.
opportunity.
It's a big star high goal. It's something beyond you. It's you get to be part of something bigger than you. And for a lot of people like you and me, that has a lot of appeal. We want to be part of something bigger. We want to do good in the world. We want to leave a mark. We want to help others. We want other people to be happy we existed. And we want to contribute in a meaningful way to the lives of other people. These are all laudable, good things to want. This is what makes us good people and pretty much on any metric. And then we find something like what Warner offers, what L. Ron Hubbard offers, and they're offering some quick path to enable those goals, to enable those purposes, to make us better versions of ourselves, we think. And of course, we're going to sacrifice and give up and commit time and commit energy and money to things like that because nothing's free in this world. And we think we're being sold something that is really amazing. And unfortunately, we are being taken advantage of because we're not aware of our own limitations and the limitations of our psychology and the limitations of our groups and what we're actually capable of. We get these very starry eyed
Right.
ideas, and this is encouraged in these groups. And this is where the awe feelings and the euphoria come from. And it feels so
That's what I
good.
was just gonna ask you. It's filling this emotional needs, right? Like not just of community, but of
That's right.
all of that. So let's, before we talk about the
Yeah.
the consumer side of it, let's spend a
Yeah.
little bit of time. And so I've been inviting people for the week to kind of send me questions. And those of you that are here with us live, we definitely want to hear from you. in the various chats and whatnot. Brilliant partner and friend and producer Rob is with us today. So he's watching all that. If you have questions or something you'd like us to talk about or say more about, please, toss that in the chat. I want to talk for a second about the predators. So, because this is something I've really struggled with, and you and I have had a few conversations about this. Do you think that there a truth to, is there reality? Like I struggle sometimes with, did Werner, was he really about making a difference anywhere along his journey? So I've now have like this encyclopedic knowledge of the whole history of Werner. And I mean, I could write a whole biography because I've had so many people call and tell me their stories, all the way going back to the beginning. But do you, I just struggle with this sometimes because it seemed so real to me that he really was out to end hunger. He really was out to, these things that they picked up, increase human performance for the good of all. The trope in the landmark thing is, we are about a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. When we look at these guys in Miscavige, Warner, these different characters, I've worked for a few other gurus, not quite as famous, but up there in their fields. Is it real for them? Do you think there's ever a point at which it's real and they get corrupted, or is it all a manipulation from the beginning? What are your thoughts about that?
A great question, and I think that I think we're gonna find individual answers for each individual cult leader or guru type,
Yeah.
because some of them are approaching their subject matter or get into this field of working with and guiding other people out of an honest effort to help. There is a corrupting influence with power and with responsibility and with having charge over the minds of other people, that can creep in and corrupt a person. And they start taking advantage of their position, and then one thing leads to another, and it's a bit of a dwindling spiral of awful as they get worse and worse and worse. And we've seen this in things like, I could say, an example of a martial arts dojo I was familiar with, where the sensei started off wanting to teach kids, teach adults about martial arts, and then finds that they're calling him master and have to do every single thing he says. And he's running a rigorous discipline program. And because he had his own personal personality issues and disordered thinking, he starts taking advantage of this and abusing the privilege he is being given. And we end
Mm,
up with a little cult, right? Inside. And this is, Karate Kid kind of stuff. I mean, this is everyday activity 24/7 around the world. This is
right.
what people get up to. However, there are also other kinds of people, other kinds of predators who are more natural, organic predators from the very get go. And we could say it's nature, it's nurture, it's a combination, it's genetics, it's this, it's that. The fact of the matter is, we don't know what it is that causes
Right.
this across the boards. We have labels for the behavior. We don't have, here's a pill to take and you won't be a predator anymore. It's not like that. It's a combination of things.
Yeah.
But speaking to intent, opportunism is a big part of this. And this
That's
is
a
where
good
I think
point.
Werner and L. Ron Hubbard, for example, really kind of shine, because these are people who are looking for shortcuts in the world. They are sales type people. Werner was out of this mold. L. Ron Hubbard was a writer and pathological liar before he was a cult guru, and a writer, and he could wordsmith. And so you get this skill set of sales or manipulation or influence, and a person then finds an opportunity where L. Ron Hubbard, writes a book that basically is about hypnotism, but he calls it the science of the mind. And we have Dianetics,
Soon
right?
as
Which
you add the science word, like, folks, really learn what actual science is and be wary. That's a red flag for me now. If somebody says the science of, I'm like,
huge,
I just did this
huge.
fantastic neuroscience in coaching class with my brilliant woman Ann Betts and her partner Ursula. Be Above, shout out to Be Above Coaching, just an amazing group, and it's a year long, program with weekly meetings and all this stuff. And then, but as soon as I did, I started getting ads for, in a weekend, you can learn the neuroscience. Then I even started getting ads about use neuroscience to like, it didn't say manipulation, but it might as well have, to get people to do da da da. And I kept thinking, these people think that's a feature, you know, because now it shows up for me. Well, that's interesting what you're saying that. So I hear two things. There's maybe leaders, people who kind of go down a path because they do want to make a difference, or maybe they happen upon some kind of ideas or some kind of teachings or whatnot that made a huge difference for them and they want to share it for the world. And then they start getting power, they start getting attention, they start getting, and that does have, we know this, a corrosive and corruptive effect when it gets conflated with the teaching. Ginny Brown at
That's
Seek
right.
Safely, we always open our safe practitioner workshops with this. As soon as you conflate the teaching, the wisdom, the knowledge, the ideas with you, like that you're the source of that, you're probably a goner in terms of losing yourself. And that can be very corrosive, and we feed that, we feed that by listening to people that way.
That's
And
right. That's why I say it's codependent.
well, and there's in the book Outrageous Betrayal, there's this great, scene in there where somebody's asking Werner, are you the second coming? Are you the return of Jesus, basically? And he says in that accounting, and these come mostly from court records and direct testimony of people who were there. The sourcing for that book, really good, by the way. He says, "No, I am the one who sent him." So he's not saying, "No, I'm not." He's like, "No, I'm not Jesus. I'm God," is
That's right.
basically what his answer implies, right?
That's right.
Now, when I was working with him, fast forward 40 years, on two occasions, people asked him that question in the course. So, first, folks, if you're asking that question, take a break. Take a pause, take a timeout, like, take a break, because that question by itself are gonna get you in trouble. In that time, he pretty much just more skirted it. Like, he really did blow it off. He was like, "No, that's," and then the first time he heard it, he had this really great story about he did say, I'm an expert in some things. I'm not an expert in everything." And he had this really great response. And then he gave homage to that there are spiritual forces out there, and he would call it above his pay grade. That's above my pay grade. Later, after he kind of he met with a big neuroscience researcher and whatnot, and then he would say, "It's all just the brain. The more I study, it's all just the brain. It's all just the brain reacting." And he would just skirt the question. But as I've learned more and more and more about his personal history and, talking through, it's like, it almost feels to me like he created all this to avoid dealing with his own illness. I swear to God, like, it feels
Of
like that.
course.
I don't have any,
Yeah.
direct, but that to avoid dealing with whatever compulsions and whatnot, because, when his staff started coming to me for help because they were being physically assaulted, it took me a while to figure out that's what that was, but because I didn't know what assault was, we had been conditioned it was training. But now I've found that that's been a part of his behavior patterns from the beginning. And
Yes.
in fact, there's whole processes in Landmark that are around some of that abuse. The pit, it was called originally, now it's called fish bowling. It still happens in seminar leader weekends. I mean, as recently as 2024, that was the last time I heard of somebody having that experience of being, held out and literally verbally and emotionally abused. I mean, just, "What are you lying about? What are you lying about? What are you," for hours. And that
Yeah,
is
and until you
abusive,
experience
folks.
something like that, it's hard to describe.
It
It's,
is.
because hours does it you can't easily communicate hours of abuse, right? It's just because it has this, like, wearing down, exhausting effect on a person, and it's really torturous. That whole fish bowling thing is really one of the worst things that comes out of this.
Well, here's interesting. So my good friend and partner Ed Gerwitz is in the chat, and he just put an interesting comment. He says, "While women are not unheard of as gurus, Byron Katie, for example." Oh yeah, thanks, Rob. "It is not a coincidence that it's mostly men. The root of corruption of power is patriarchy." Interesting. I don't know. What do you think about that? I'm not
No,
sure
I
about that.
disagree with that completely.
I figured. Well, you and I had a really good conversation yesterday that I was like, "Ooh, that's a good question." What we were talking about yesterday. Why do you
Yeah,
disagree with that?
the root of corruption of power is patriarchy. I just don't think that's true because that gives all women some kind of big pass or something in history, and, that's just not true.
Well, there's an issue.
However,
We have patriarchy and matriarchy conflated with
yeah, it's
gender. So
as
lots of
though
women.
no matriarchy ever hurt anybody or didn't abuse anybody or, women in charge never hurt anyone or something. I mean, we were talking about this, you and I, yesterday, how there is this sort of gendered filter on this. And certainly, please don't get me wrong. Obviously, physical abuse, domestic violence is a male centric, male,
Mhm.
majority problem. I'm not saying otherwise. Statistically speaking, there isn't any, it's not even remotely close. But the idea that imbalances of power are male centric is something I'm going to push back on because I've seen and read about many, many, many instances of women coercively controlling men, all the way through, the worst of the criminal activities that can occur there. We don't need to say the words out loud, but it's bad because it's a human problem. It's an emotional and moral problem. It's a script flipping problem where the predator, whether male or female, feels that they are empowered to do whatever they want because they are morally justified in doing so. And
Mm.
anybody can fall prey to that or be susceptible to that kind of thinking.
Well, and I think patriarchy, my women's group, we've been talking about this for 6 years now. I think patriarchy sort of represents a social system that, has evolved over time, thousands of years. And it is definitely based in dominance. It's got the hierarchical. Somebody asked me once if I had a magic wand, what would I do? And I said I would wave it and get rid of all the archies and isms, the sexism, racism, hierarchy, patriarchy. And there's a big misunderstanding about matriarchy because mostly we do see these two dynamics through a gender lens. Patriarchy is the men, matriarchy is the women. That's way overly too simplistic.
Exactly.
Matriarchy is not simply women in charge. That's patriarchy regime change. That's my dear friend Suzanne. You say we're not for regime change. Just put the women in charge. So, and there's no doubt that the dominant role in our society has been the white European male. And that, in my view, we're seeing that start to hit its limits and, down. But I think we want to be careful of calling that the source. That's kind of what I thought in that comment. I was like, oh, I don't know how I call it the source of that. I would call it
Right.
an enabler, like that the
Exactly.
patriarchal
That was my,
systems
yeah, that was my disagreement.
enable
Yeah.
that kind of dominant, I'm the dominant. And look, we're seeing it huge in our society right now. Might is right, force wins. And we actually know it's true in a short term, it's never true in a long term. So, and we do a lot of damage in that short term, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to pick
Yeah,
up on this other
if you want to know whether might is right works as a cultural foundational principle, go ask the Spartans.
right,
Like it works for a while and
for a
you can
while,
become
exactly.
something very interesting, but it does have a time limit. Yeah.
The program I used to lead at Landmark, there was a line in the manual from Brian Regnier, who was the main author of the particular version that I led, but it always said, "Behavioral reinforcement is always only a temporary solution." Whether you're putting it on yourself, or
Yeah.
on another, but it
Yeah.
only works temporarily,
Yes.
like that. My one of my current teachers and coaches says that she said as a woman, she marched for women's rights. She went to jail. She lived in Detroit in the 1970s. And she said, we won so many gains for women. And we did that, through our voices and whatnot. She said, but what we never did, what we didn't accomplish was changing hearts. We changed minds, but we didn't change hearts. Is kind of how that's how she feels about it. Cause I asked her, I said, what's it like for you having fought so hard for women's rights to see what's happening now, particularly the overturning of Roe v. Wade and all these things? And she said, yeah, she goes, I just think we didn't win as many hearts as we thought we did. We just got
No, because
structural changes.
that's right. It's a generational change that she's looking for. And unfortunately, it takes time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
One thing I want to, before it goes back too far, Rob, what was that question from Robin about? Oh, so when Landmark referred to, I just want to pick that off really quick because that was an easy one. Yes. So one of the things that I've learned in the last couple of years, big time, is that Werner's personality is Landmark's culture, including the abusive aspects. So
That's key
including
for
his
every cult. What you just said is actually true across the board.
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt
No,
you.
it's great. So
Yeah.
this is how it goes with Chris and I. We were like for hours. It's so fun. So it's and that's what was startling. See, when I wrote my book, I thought I was warning Landmark. This like feels so naive right now. But anyway, just to be really clear, like I really did think I was warning Landmark and the graduates. I knew there were these legal actions in motion. I knew that the abuse that I had come to know about was going to be becoming public knowledge. I thought it would be way sooner than it is and will be. So, and I saw Landmark was tying itself back to Werner and the legacy. They had their website at the time was all like, the source and da 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 da. Da. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Because see, I came in at a time when he'd been erased. I now know he was never actually gone fully, but in my world, I didn't have any connection to that because they had effectively transferred the source from the person to the teaching, to the doctrine, to the ideology. They had transferred it to Landmark. Landmark was now the source of transformation. And they would even say, we're not the only one, but we're the best one. That was always what was in the unsaid, right? So, but we have the secret sauce because we have Werner sauce. And then when you get to the inside, when you start working in the upper, in the hierarchical, higher echelons of Landmark, what you will hear and particularly after 2015, which was a time when Werner started working very directly with the Landmark C-suite and the forum leaders, like much more. I mean, he was an occasional presence before that, but from 2015, he started being a regular presence up to 2020, 2021. Um, I've been told from pretty reliable sources, he was actually managing the forum leaders for results. Like he was in there all the time. But so all of that they would say in there, well, what would Werner do? Well, when I asked the question, my book cover, people think I'm just trying to be sensational. No, that was the actual question I was grappling with. Wait, because I couldn't understand why Landmark as an organization kept doubling down on really bad practices and stupid business models. And, I was just like, what an overly complicated processes. But after I hosted Werner and worked alongside Werner and his staff crew, it started to make sense because they're all doing what Werner would do, which even if we're super generous and it totally worked in the 70s and 80s, it doesn't work in today's world. And we now know after 30 years, it doesn't work at all. Then I would meet people like Chris and find out most of it came from Scientology anyway.
Exactly. Exactly. Including the question, what would Werner do? I laughed at that because that's the question we asked ourselves constantly. What would Ron do? It was never what should I do? It's what would Ron do? And I'm supposed to model my behavior and my thinking after him. And this is part of the whole effort of literally merging. I know it sounds extreme, but literally over time, this is how it works is you're merging your personality with the cult leader, with your perception of the cult leader. And you want to be this person, you want to emulate this person. Well, it starts with I want to get some good ideas from this person. Then it becomes, oh, I need to be like this person. Then it becomes, no, I need to be them, not be like them. And
Yeah.
that merging is really the path of cultdom. I mean, if you want one way of
Right.
thinking about it, that's it. You lose
Well,
yourself in this group.
that's one of the ways that Landmark as an organization has defended against the cult monarch. We don't have a leader.
Yes,
Yes, they do.
yes, they do.
All the way down to I've heard from some of their top leaders multiple times, and now I've heard the story repeated over and over. I have a thing when 5 people tell me the same thing, it's probably true. Before that, I'm like, but when you start, that's my number 5. When 5 people say the same thing, it probably happened, or it's probably true. But the whole, originally you were to be Werner's work in the world. That's another common thing. So maybe we're not Werner the personality, but I'm going to be Werner's work in the world. So that's the way it kind of waters down over time.
Right.
But initially, I know, and, I think Ed is hopefully still on here. Ed, feel free to pop in a comment here, but he was an S trainer. He got trained as S. He traveled with Werner back in the days. And as I understand it, that their job was to be Werner in the world, like to be a replication. And then that kind of mellows, right? As then Werner leaves, which we should definitely talk about the whole mythology about Scientology is the one who ruined him. Um, Somebody put that in my comments. Hang on, we're going to come back to that. Let me. Uh, but it's so yes, in that way, there is a leader and the ideas are so conflated, as they're taught in Landmark, that particular articulation, that then the power, the sourceness gets transferred onto the ideas. It moves from the person to the ideas. Then the practices and systems that hold all that in place become the culture. And it is the most shocking thing that I've learned since my book came out was that the abusive culture I was trying to warn people about around Werner is alive and well in Landmark. It's just, all the way to the absolute worst thing that we've heard. It's now been stated in a public hearing in the UK, so I can say it out loud. But that, in fact, here we'll say it exactly how it was said. And that I got a thing from the lawyer. I'm like, what? Because I don't want to endanger any future things, but some of the physical abuse witnessed: hitting, slapping, pushing, chasing after staff, throwing food and other objects, pulling the hair of a staff member, strangulation, which I was shocked and have since learned. So I've now heard of that, not just from multiple former staff of Werner's, but staff, centers, division staff in Landmark being, had somebody put their hands around their throat. And we now know there's been studies done that that is actually one of the top precursors to um, homicide of a spouse or intimate partner,
Mhm.
which is why the penalties for it are much stronger than other forms of domestic abuse because it's a precursor. It's a big deal to threaten somebody's life, folks, whether it's verbally or by putting your hands around their throat.
That's right.
And then pulling staff members by the ears, things like that. I've now
Yeah.
heard of that in the Landmark centers, people being slapped, punched, pinched, things thrown at them, which was just startling. And then on top of that, then the level of verbal assault is really, it's there, folks. It's just there. We have to talk about it. One, to stop it. Two, to set the people free that have experienced that, free to heal. Because I promise you, I've talked to many of them. They're living as if it was their fault. The being abused was their fault.
Right.
They were
That's part of
failures.
the dynamic of the predator relationship is the convincing their victims that it's their fault. That's why we spent so much time and talking about responsibility
Mm,
because
yeah.
that is the central core, philosophical thing they can get. That's the idea they can give you. You're the one who's responsible for everything that happens to you. You're the source of everything that occurs to you. Your state or emotion or feelings or attitudes are what bring good or bad things to you. This is the secret. This is the law of attraction, and it's as old as the hills. This thinking has been around for a very, very,
Right.
very long time. And it is used by predators to depower their followers with an empowering message. That's the conflicting
Mm.
weirdness of what this kind of group is it says one thing and preaches this really illuminating, empowering thing while it's really cutting you off at the knees over and over and over again. And
Okay.
this is an example of that is the physical abuse that
And
ends up as a result.
that's the part that's so confusing because I remember when one of our early conversations, I think I asked you something along the lines of, well, I can see it was like this for me. The organization is bad. The business practices are bad. By bad, I mean harmful, hurtful to people, exploitive. In other words, taking more than they're giving. That to me, there's transaction where we're exchanging and that should be a fairly equitable or fair thing. Exploitation is when more is being taken from you than is being given to you. And a lot of people will insist, no, I got so much out of Landmark. I did too, folks. And I remember saying to you, like, okay, the organization's bad, but the work is good, Chris. Like the ideas are good. And you said to me, I will never forget it because you said to me, yeah, that's stage one.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like,
And that was so
what are you
judgmental of me to say, by the way. I mean, it was really pretty I probably shouldn't have said that, but
talking? I'm like, stage one? What do you
yeah.
mean? How many more are there? And then
Oh, this is
you
beautiful.
sent me the 7 stages of whatever, of like, and 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 now I think I'm maybe in stage 4 or something. I don't know where I'm at, but because now I'm at, wait, a culture of that kind of abuse that persists 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, modifies a little bit, almost entirely only to avoid legal repercussions, not because there's a moral sense. There is some of that. I mean, there's definitely, I actually believe Mick Levitt, the guy currently running Landmark, is actually a good guy. I've met him. I know him. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll find out I'm wrong. I think he's been so corrupted that he doesn't, to use the Rumsfeld/Landmark thing, doesn't know what he doesn't know because he's so in the system. And that's why I say regularly, Harry, Mick, Kevin, you guys are in a cult. You're fully indoctrinated and you're doing things that if you stepped out of that and looked back, I think you would probably find are a violation of your own moral and ethical code. But it becomes part of it. And what I'm starting to find, you can't really separate the work from that. That's not a clean line. That's not where the line is. The line isn't the organization or that person or those people are bad or corrupt or predatory. No, the work itself and the systems and structures that create the culture of that organization support that kind of abuse and overstep, like,
That's right.
and they go together. And that's why now, particularly on the Beyond the Line, that's part of why I started Beyond the Line. Let's start digging into these ideas and they're across all the groups, responsibility, integrity, like all of that. Let's start looking at how those ideas actually create a sort of coercion and stickiness that has good people doing bad things.
That's
That's
right.
that's sort of where I am in my own exploration now.
And that's kind of how this works is you're deconstructing or taking apart the structure and fabric of the group and what it
Yeah,
meant to you and how you interacted with it and what meaning you could say, right, you derived from it, because a lot of people derive a lot of good moral meaning and positive energy out of these ideas, and when they're doing that, that's the positive spin. That's the, yes, this is helping me, I feel better as a result.
yeah,
Well, feeling better, I just want to point out, feeling better isn't necessarily helping you. Feeling
mm,
better is feeling better. I can eat a Twinkie and feel better. Doesn't mean it's helping
for a
me.
minute.
For a minute, exactly. But what's the longer term look here? Is it doing what it promises? Is this transformation actually transforming my life, actually transforming my ability to interact with other people? Or am I just telling myself I feel really good? So therefore I'm empowered and I'm godlike now and I'm ready to rock. Or do you just having a good day? You know, like that, like these emotions are volatile and changing constantly. And so
Right.
it's easy to spin that into this works, but you got to look at the longer term picture of what effect has it had on your life, your relationships, your job, your income, et cetera, as to whether it's actually creating a positive effect or not. And if it is, I literally have nothing to say about it. My
Yeah.
Where I come in is when it's coercive, when it's abusive, when it's predatory. And sometimes though the trick is convincing somebody or showing somebody that they're being preyed upon when they're in the beneficial optimistic phase and
When they're
everything is
feeling good.
great, you
Yeah.
know? That's the hard part.
Well, here's where I started to see some of what you said. Like I can look back and see some evidence, as it were, for what you're saying. So in part of the Being a Leader project, my job was to market this work. And so every program we would do 10, 15, 5, whatever testimonials. I never could use any of them because they never made any sense. I mean, I think out of 50 or 60, I found 4 over time where they could actually tie an insight they'd had or a tool they had taken and applied it and show that in a cogent way. Almost always, because of course we're doing them while we're there in the course environment. Everybody's like, oh my God, it's the best thing. It's like they just left this fantastic concert. And look, I love that. I watched the Amanda Knox show last night and was like on a total high because I just loved where she took what happened to her and what she did and the insights that she had. And I saw a lot of that and I felt really good. Um, and I did, learn some things or whatnot. I mean, we'll parlay some of those good feelings into actions. And here's the other part I've seen in deconstructing is you start to pull the ideas apart and you pull the silliness, the nonsense, uh, illogical aspects, the harmful aspects. As you start to pull that off, what you do find is almost all these ideas are based on some valid idea, often of the ages that we've known for a long time, like the fact that people see things through filters. We know that. That's a idea. It's through everything in Landmark. It's your story versus what you're making it mean. That's not a bad tool. The tool itself, in some of the tools are just stupid, but some of the tools, they're based in sound psychological principle. They're based in studied, impacts of ideas and philosophies, psychology. Like, so there is value because that's the number one question people got me. But is there value? Of course there's value. We wouldn't have participated for 20 years if there wasn't value, perceived or otherwise. But it's learning the difference. Okay, what's the feeling and how's that impacting me from the actual result? Are my relationships really better? Hard to tell. I got a lesson in that when I started hanging out with my neighborhood book and wine club that were all women who had done no transformational work, and yet their lives were really great. Their kids were being in some ways more than ours, very successful. They had, jobs that they, loved and they're making a difference in the world. I was like, they're not missing anything. In fact, I think maybe I'm missing some things that they have. But I wouldn't have known that until I'm participating with that. So anyway, so it's complicated. It's big. So there's a little bit of truth. My friend Ann Betts often says this stuff would be a lot easier to counter if it didn't have a little bit of truth in it.
Well, and this is actually a really, really important thing to talk about. So let's do that for a second
Okay.
because I'd like to address this point. It's something that lots and lots and lots of ex-members struggle with, trying to find the good in the bad, right? Trying to find or hold on to or keep the positive, or there must have been something good about this. And there's varying things that can be said about this. Sometimes that is just a desperate attempt to hold on to, something, anything to justify having spent all that money and time and energy and all that. When in fact, you just kind of need to realize somebody got one over on you and there really wasn't a whole lot of value there. But at the same time, now that all being said, there's also a matter of, well, what is value for you? What is value
Mm,
that you got from it? And really thinking about that and engaging with that question can lead to taking apart what is it that this actually did for you. And it's not on me to tell you you got nothing out of it. I say that for some people, because for some people that's true. But
mhm.
maybe for others, there was a positive change, or because they did that work, had they not done that work, they wouldn't have gotten X, Y, or Z. Fine. I got nothing to say about that. What I
Right.
do have something to say about, though, is just like is building on the point you were just making, which is what's the actual source of that change? If you're going to
Yes.
assign it to
Yeah.
Warner, if you're going to assign it to Landmark and not acknowledge that he ripped that off of L. Ron Hubbard, who ripped it off of Jung, who ripped it off of Freud, who ripped it off of,
Don't leave
some other
Alistair out.
person,
Alistair
you can
Crawley.
take this thing back quite a ways
Yeah.
as to
Madame
where
Blavatsky.
ideas come from and how they develop and change over time. And for those who are curious, it's really fascinating stuff because you do find out how old some of these ideas are and how long people have been kicking them around in philosophy and psychology and metaphysics and all of this kind of
Right.
stuff. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there and has been for a very long time. If you only focus on your personal experience and don't want to go down those rabbit holes or go down those histories or look into those things, you don't have to.
Yeah.
But you will end up with a very limited idea of your experiences and this kind of idea, well, Warner came up with no, he didn't. That's actually a lie. Warner didn't come up with hardly anything. Warner took from other people, rephrased it, sometimes barely, and then delivers it to people and they go, "Oh, wow, this is very sensational and very, very interesting and it's really electrifying me. It must be Warner who is causing this, therefore Landmark is the thing."
Right.
And that's the limited sort of view that we trap ourselves with,
Yeah,
because
the
of our own. Yeah,
value is in what you do with the tool. But the problem is most of us don't understand the tools we've been given. That's what I've been
exactly.
really learning is in my work with Ed. And he and I now started what we call the practitioner studio, in part to take this stuff apart and to really examine it and look at, well, wait, what are the healthy uses? What are the harmful uses? Where is this applicable? Where is this not applicable? See, that's the part that's left out all the time. There's some very, very general, people at the end of the forum, they'll say, these tools are only for you. Don't use them on others. That'll get you in trouble, which has as much to do with protecting their intellectual property. And they want you to get people to come get the tools from them. They don't want you giving it away. But that is true too. Like you can't manage somebody else's integrity or, tell somebody else to be responsible. They don't want a bunch of junior forum leaders running around out there, although they've been saying that for 50 years and there's so many junior forum leaders, it's exhausting. But so it's not working, guys. But they don't understand their own work and their own ideas. And now people are doing, Ed's book, Transformation from Potential to Practice. Part of why he put that out, he was part of the creation from S to the forum, is he wanted people to know, no, no, these are the source of these ideas. These are where they come from. This psychological principle, that philosopher, this da 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 da. So, because groups like this, not just Landmark, but all of them, they capture these ideas, they put a little twist on them, and they copyright them so that they can capitalize on them, so that
That's
they
right.
can commodify them. And in my opinion, that's a little bit a problem of that system. That system demands that we do that. It's, the way our current economic systems are set up are very proprietary and hierarchical. They support all of those systems that we're now seeing quite problematic. What I'm learning is I'm masterful in those distinctions. I promise you. I am masterful. I worked with the source. I worked with multiple sources and trained for some of the best. I'm just starting to see some of the fallacies, the inconsistencies, but because of all the stories people have shared with me, the harms that I didn't know were even possible. I didn't know. I just didn't know. I call myself Glenna the Good Witch all the time, floating around in my pink dress in my bubble, going, "Oh, but we're changing the world." And it's, "Oh, yes, there's some assholes that do bad things, but that's just those few predators that are out there. The work is good."
Let
No.
me let me give you an analogy that is maybe safe for people to hear in the landmark space because it's not landmark.
Mhm.
That might demonstrate a point I think about this stuff, right? Which is Dianetics. I mentioned earlier that it's just straight hypnotism, which is what it is. You put somebody into a trance and you send them back down a memory stream of, to some trauma incident that they've had, some event where they were hurt or physically abused or something like that, or had an accident or injury, and you relive this experience over and over again. You literally walk back through it as though you are living it again and describing it in the here and now. And through this reliving process, you're supposed to relieve the trauma and it's all supposed to go away. But these are not the words that are used. You are told that you have a reactive mind. There is an actual physical thing called a reactive mind that you're carrying around with you, and stored in this reactive mind are all of the sense perceptions of that traumatic episode. Theirs are called engrams. There's a word, that's the word they use. Complete fantasy. There is no
Nexium
such
has a
thing.
whole version of this in
They,
the
of course
vow.
they
They've
do,
got their
because they
own, yeah,
ripped it off from Hubbard.
right.
That the engram is a fantasy. There is no engram in your brain or in your body or stored somewhere, but Hubbard says there is, and that this is an actual thing. So he creates this illusion of structure that doesn't exist, Then he says that there's these traumatic episodes that you're carrying around with you. And because of the trauma and force and energy stored in them, this energy is exerted against you later on in your life. And this is why trauma and engrams are bad. And the words that are stored in these engrams can come back on you later and hurt you. You know, you're getting bit by a dog and somebody is saying, "Stop, you cruel monster," right, to this dog. And later on, you feel like a cruel monster during a time when you're feeling, tired and anxious and your hand hurts, and you start getting this idea that you're a cruel dog because of these words in this thing. Hubbard lays all of this out in this book, Dianetics, and people buy into this logic hook, line, and sinker because they don't understand the brain or memory or the mind or how this stuff actually works. So, lacking that knowledge, they fall for this story.
Right.
Now the
When
now
it
the
feels
now
like
the
relief, right? Like you can get relief
Well, here's what
from things.
yeah, because what happens is you go into this Dianetics auditing session and you believe that you are awake and alert the entire time, and because you're told that, and you're being sent back down the time track in your mind to these events, these engrams, and you relive them, and that blows them. That releases all that energy, and you no longer are suffering from the ill effects of that engram, you are told. But what this really is not engrams, not reactive mind. You are being put into a hypnotic trance. And in that hypnotic trance, you are being given suggestions, post and pre hypnotic suggestions that create this sort of fertile ground to believe this story. It's just hypnotism. But not once the entire time that you're in Dianetics and Scientology are you told you are being put in a trance state and you are being hypnotized. That language is rejected and
Mm.
fought back against. And Hubbard literally says hypnotism puts you to sleep. We are waking you up. We are the
Oh.
antidote to hypnotism. We are exact opposite of hypnotism. The words they tell you are not trustworthy. They're doing
But
something to you, but you don't know what it is that's actually being done to you. You buy into their framing and you walk around for years talking about your engrams and how your reactive mind has been cleared. No, all that's happened to you is you were hypnotized a bunch of times. So
okay,
it's
so
that's what I mean by the
yeah.
bait and switch of this.
But how do you know? Okay, so you just spoke to the lack of informed consent, right? Like you're not
Yes,
actually being told what's actually happening, right?
that's right.
So that is, and some of that I think happens, like I know in Landmark, a lot of the leaders, they don't even know they're leading an LGAT, let alone what an LGAT is and then what
Exactly.
it's doing and what's happening in the nervous system and the brain and all that. They're just seeing the effects of it. I
That's
tell a
right.
story in my book of a forum leader who's a fantastic guy who was telling me about how he, in a seminar session, he cured somebody of their PTSD. And I just had to say, I'm sorry, that's not a thing. But here's, as you were saying all that, I just had this thought. So I just want to play devil's advocate for a second. If it works and I feel better and I'm less reactive and I'm more able to function maybe in my workplace or my family because I'm less reactive, does it matter? Does the ends justify the means? And is
Yes,
that even true?
right.
Like,
And
is it true
I'm
that it
gonna say
works?
no. The ends do not justify the means. No, you are not in a place where you are as better off as you could or should be because of the lack of informed consent. Something was done to you and you don't really totally understand the nature of what was done. I think that's a disservice. I think that that's wrong. I think people should be told exactly what's being done to them and exactly how and why it's being done to them so that they will understand the process and therefore assign proper agency and causation to who did what to you. How much of it was based on your own misinformation of what was being done to you, like the engrams,
Yeah.
versus, then because then you can come up with, like you said, ridiculous ideas like you're curing PTSD in a seminar. That's a ludicrous
Well,
idea to walk around thinking you have that ability to do that to somebody or that even could happen. It doesn't work that way. So So it's an impossible goal or an impossible standard
That's
or,
the part
you know
that's the part I wanna get because and I don't think I could have seen this now looking back, I started all this work when I was about 28, I'm now 57, right? So almost 30 years. And I know a lot of people that I knew 20 years ago and 10 years ago, and they're great people. I mean,
Yeah,
and we've all grown in different ways and whatnot. I'll tell you what, the ones that have actually matured, maturated in their own personal growth and development, quite honestly, are the people who have done a lot more than like they did some landmark, but they've done a lot of other things. They've done
sure.
therapy, they've done like lots of other things,
Right.
spiritual work, physical work. Those are the healthiest people that I know. And then many who've never done any landmark, but they've done, their own growth and development and through different modalities and whatnot. But we now know, as we've been studying the effects of trauma and so on, that the whole thing of taking somebody back into their thing is very controversial now, even in the therapeutic world. Most therapists, my daughter has complex trauma. And so we have worked with a lot of therapists and a lot of modalities in the last 13 years. Almost all of them now understand that going to the incident is more re-traumatizing than relieving.
That's right. I think the numbers by the studies that I've read come out to about 10% in terms of people who are actually going to have positive outcomes
Right.
from doing something like that. And even that's a bit of a broad shoot in terms of positive outcomes. We're not talking about cures or
Yeah.
they no longer have that issue. It's just positive outcomes, right? And that's only 10%.
Well, and what I would say, in the literally hundreds of people I've now talked to, former graduates, staff members, program leaders, and I host this group, Healthy Healing, right, with Rachel Bernstein. And what's come up in that is we're seeing that a lot of this personal development training actually masked the trauma, actually masked, hid, or suppressed,
Right.
right?
Because the
So it
person now
actually,
walks around thinking they're not supposed to have that anymore. And so every time it pops up, they're like,
exactly.
no, that can't be. And they suppress the hell out of it.
Or it just didn't work on me. Transformation didn't work on me.
That too.
Oh my gosh, there's something truly deeply wrong with me because it didn't
Yeah.
work on me.
Yeah.
Why?
That's
Because it
right.
came back. I did that seminar. I had this moment of release and wonderful feeling. And I thought I had completed, that's the landmark word. I had completed my, PTSD.
And
No.
this is and let me add, because this is a really good point. Let me please add that when you then add the layer of responsibility on top of this, that you're the one who is responsible for everything about you and your condition and situation, that traps the person because then they're like, "Oh, there must be something about me," like you were just saying, because that the dogma teaches you that that's how it is. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So,
It's
because
like
what
that in
I'm starting to
Scientology
come
too.
to is like, what you said earlier, yes, I did have a powerful feeling. Maybe I had an insight that did provide something for me. And then I've parlayed that in, I've turned that into new kinds of actions. As we used to say, is gosh, I can't, let's see if it can come up. It's merging, but something about what transformation is, openings for action, create powerful new action or something. Chris told me, one of the other things Chris told me right off is stop using the language. That's how you deprogram. Man, does it work. It's so great. But it also, it forces you to start thinking. You don't realize how in the cliches you are until you stop using them. And then you have to go, wait, what am I actually trying to say here? Then you start to realize that the cliche or the idea, like context is decisive is one of my favorite ones to pick on. 100% responsible is the other one. That doesn't actually hold water. But I just want to make this point again, folks. I have talked to so many people that thought that they cured traumatic childhood issues and things, even myself as one. Yes, I did make a difference with some of the incidences and things that happened to me when I was a child. Most of you heard me tell the story about my mother being raped and beaten, and we're like escaping out the house and running down the back alley. And I'm like knocking on doors until somebody brings us in and we call the police. That was a very easily traumatic moment. Did all my landmark participations loosen a little bit of that? A little bit. It loosened disassociated me, to be really honest. It anesthetized me to a certain extent. Where I really started to work on that was actually in a spiritual study group that I work with. And I really started to see how that was the formulation of I have to save people or they'll die kind of thing, which is all over my life. And so for 5 years, 6 years now, I've been working very actively of putting that down. No, I don't it's not my job to save people. It's not my job to save the world. But it is a conscious thing I have to work on every day, which is another reason why I've partnered with Ed, because Ed relates to transformation as a practice, not a moment. It's like, I have an
Exactly.
insight, I see something, now I have to practice new actions, and
That's
that's
right.
included in our mental processes. In a lot of these quick fix kind of seminar groups like Landmark, that doesn't they'll tell, yes, you have to take actions to get a result, but they don't say you have to take actions to actually change your brain patterning. They leave you with that weekend changed your brain pattern.
Right.
So then when it
And that's
comes
the thought
back,
shift, right?
yeah, you're in a problem because 'cause I'm seeing people that were in programs even with me 20 years ago, and they're still the same people they were, and they're great people, there's nothing wrong with them, there never was, and, but it didn't cure anything,
No.
so
No,
that's
and
frustrating.
it just doesn't work like that, and that's one of the things that neuroscience has been teaching us and social psychology has been teaching us. There's a lot of stuff that people have learned that haven't yet permeated out into the popular sphere and out into the popular sort of lexicon of things. There's a lot that's how always how it works with science is doing the stuff, and then 10, 20 years out, people start learning about it, and this is,
Right.
I mean, a lot of the trauma work we know about in common, parlance that you and I are sitting here talking about, this was stuff that was studied 20 years ago in the field. They've known about
Yeah,
this for a while. So it really behooves us to get curious and find out more about where these fields
right.
are actually at. I was stunned when I got out of Scientology, stunned to learn about where neuroscience was at because I had been preached at for decades that the brain and neuroscience and none of that stuff matters. None of it, they don't know anything. They are never going to know anything because the brain is just a switchboard and doesn't mean anything anyway. So I had just a few key statements in Scientology that completely nullified any effort or any idea on interest in my part that neuroscience had anything for me or had anything to offer
Mm.
me. And it was only after I left Scientology and started talking to neuroscientists that I was like, God damn, they've got all kinds of things figured out about memory and rationality and
Emotion?
emotions and the
The work
various systems of the brain, and then there's this whole other nervous system down here that's just as extensive in your gut and the gut biome and this communication system between the brain and the gut. Once you start learning about just a little bit of that stuff, it blows your mind as to why we do what we do and how we act the way we act. And it really puts these landmark Scientology simpleton answers into a box that you go, "Oh my God, these guys really didn't have any idea at all." And how could they? They're not neuroscientists. They're not social psychologists or
right.
therapeutic psychologists. They're dudes who read some books. Hubbard read out of Reader's Digest. That's where he got most of his ideas from. And that's who Werner was cribbing from. So these ideas are not genius ideas come up with in this, in this place of amazing intellectual rigor and discipline. These were half-baked ideas that were thrown at people with an emotional punch, and they went,
Mm.
"My God, I've never experienced anything like this before. This must be the thing." And there is no the thing. That's the lie.
That's the part, yeah.
That's the lie, Transformation takes time. This is what cognitive behavioral therapy will do for you if you give it time. There are treatment modalities that will give this to you if you, work at it. But the idea you're going to have a weekend one and done and no longer have to deal with your combat trauma or something or your abusive childhood. I mean, come on. This is just silly. And we
Yeah,
know
it
this,
doesn't
you know?
this is kind of where I'm at right now is that yes, there's some good ideas in there. There is, like that, how it's taught matters. What the leader actually understands about the ideas really, really matters. Being trauma informed really, really matters. And Landmark, look, guys, I've been in the rooms. They purport, oh, we've got the latest neuroscience studies and this and that. But they have a tendency, all these groups do this. Again, it's not just, I pick on them because that's my direct experience, but I want to be really clear. This is all over the place. What they're doing is they're looking for confirmation bias. They're looking through the neuroscience to validate what they already know, to know the
That's right.
work that Warner was talking about this in the 70s. And
Exactly.
the other thing that happens, I learned this from a lot of the academics because I was, as the host of the Being a Leader course, I was interacting with the people in it a lot. And the academics, several academics quite often had big problems with the work, they call it, because what they would recognize is little pieces and parts were pulled out of other work and used in part, taken out of, and this is the whole problem with appropriation, right? So
Yeah.
we talk often about, Kirby, the Brown's daughter who died in a ill run. They always say ill run sweat lodge because this was somebody who does not understand the totality of what sweat lodges are in the indigenous culture, mocked it up, used it for his own purposes, didn't understand the world of it nor the dangers, and 3 people died and 28 people went to the hospital. And that's where I'm at. I'm like, "Look, guys, we can do this better. We don't have to throw it all out completely, oh, maybe for a while, until we can pick it up piece by piece and take it apart and go, well, wait a minute. And then where did that really come from? What context? What's missing? What got left out? What got left behind?
That's right.
What what is not understood? Where is it applicable? Where is it not applicable? Those are the things.
Exactly.
Because I have 2 other things I really want to make sure we talk about. And Rob, I'm just kind of counting on you. If a really good question goes by, you'll let me know. You'll pop it in or whatnot. I'm going to go to something that a bunch of former staff members wanted. I said, "Hey, what do you guys want people to know?" And I really do consider, I want to be really clear about this. Okay. Folks, I was not abused in that nobody hit me, nobody punched me, nobody strangled me, nobody even really yelled at me, to be honest. I had a pretty damn good experience in Landmark. So this is one of the things, this comes up in chats all the time. Oh, she's just, whatever. I worked way too long. I missed a whole bunch of my children's growing up. I was not there for my daughter when she was being abused. There's all kinds of impacts. But when I talk about the abuse, I am speaking for the hundreds now of former staff, program leaders. My book was me speaking for aides, staff to Warner that cannot speak for themselves for a variety of reasons. Some because there's legal actions, some because they are still in the traumatic effects and not ready, not really grapple. They're in the midst of grappling with that. It's not psychologically safe or healthy. So I just want to be really clear. I am an advocate for the people who have been harmed. And I am speaking a lot from multiple stories. And like I said, I typically don't talk about something publicly until I've heard it 5 times. That's my thing. I've heard it from 5 different people, 5 different directions, but it's got a similar theme. And one of the defenses, aside from there is no single leader, one of the other big defenses that people are defend Landmark and groups like it is that you can leave at any time.
Hmm.
And I want you to talk with us a little bit about why that's bullshit, because you have a master's degree in coercion,
Well,
understand coercion. I've learned a lot about coercion. Here, this is literally what some staff members said to me last night. Can you talk about how we were made to assist as part of our staff hours? Now, your staff hours are a minimum of 62 hours a week. So then you were often required to do another 15 or 20 hours of assisting, which is Landmark code for volunteering, which is illegal, by the way. That is in the United States. Staff hours, after hours. They were not paid for it. They were considered volunteers, which, let me mention again, is actually illegal to have you in a paid job and then continue in that job on a volunteer status. That's not a thing. Folks, why they don't have an assisting program anymore is because they've known since 1990 was a violation of U.S. labor law. I should say they don't have it in the United States. They're still doing it all over the place in India, Asia, Australia. So so you're working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. You are exhausted, part 1. There were times when we wanted to leave and we would have a gazillion conversations, hours and hours of conversations about why, if you left, you were abandoning transformation. You were going to and I've had this with high level volunteers too. If you stop leading that program in that out of area, that's a Landmark term for someplace where there wasn't a physical center, but there was a presence, programs being offered. If you leave that leadership role, transformation's no longer gonna ever be available in that town or that geographical place. You are the problem. You are gonna cost people their transformation. So you're, completely talk about it's more than 100% responsibility. I don't even know what that is. And then you're ridiculed. They ridiculed us emotionally, abused us under the guise of coaching. How we were told single-handedly that we were taking down the business because we failed to perform. And I've seen complaints that went to headquarters as recently as 2024 with these kinds of behaviors, somebody being brought in the office and berated for hours about how you're costing the world transformation. You're an idiot. You're a moron. It goes way into ad hominem attacks. And that's a verbal abuse, folks. So can you just speak a little bit to the coercion aspect? Why is it so hard for people, even when they know that it's hurt, like they feel they're being harmed? One gal on my podcast talked about walking to the roof of the building and thinking about jumping off and realizing it wouldn't kill her. So she went back down and sat at her desk and went to work.
Yeah, that kind of stuff's rough. And of course, we're talking about emotional and moral investment here. Um, and this is really where the cult layer of Landmark comes out, real obviously. But when you're at the lower levels of Landmark, and even here, we've talked about how you can go get therapy, you can go do other practices, you can go get your chakras read and stuff like that. In Scientology, you can't. There is no external practice you can go do. They discourage all that. So this is why Landmark is a little Scientology light for the public level experience of it, because you can go do other things and get transformation any way you want. But when you start working for Landmark, this is where I think the cult
Or take
really
on
starts
a leadership
coming
role,
out. Yeah,
even
this
the
leadership
lowest
business.
level, like even introduction leader, which is the
That's right.
lowest level. You can't, then now you can't do other things.
No,
It's one of
because
your
now
big
you
things.
have responsibilities and obligations being put on you by the group, and you have rules, and this
Well,
is
here's what your job is: to become the organization. It's literally
yeah,
that.
that
The seminar leader weekend number
you got it.
1 is your job is to move it as seminar. How you move from apprentice to candidate to designate is by becoming seminar leader.
Yeah.
Like
I
literally supplanting your identity.
well, I
That's
think
the
this is where we could say the unhealthy relationship with the organization really kicks in a big, big, big way, right? As opposed to your passive. I went to a couple seminars a few years ago, right? I mean, that's not psychologically gonna, for most people, 99.9%, that's not gonna, ruin their life forever. But once you start giving yourself, once you start becoming the organization, as you say, this is isolation, manipulation, and control. And that's what coercive control is. It's isolating you from the outside world. It's not making you a bigger, better part of the world and more tuned into the world. It's bringing you out of the world and into this bubble world, this
I want you to
reality
pause
that
there
is,
for a sec, because one of the other
yeah.
defenses is that it doesn't do that.
Well,
Folks,
of course they say it
that's
doesn't do
a
that.
lie. Well, Landmark doesn't even say, I mean, the staff, inside staff, they don't even say that. They're like, yeah, you don't have time for that. You're saving the world. You're up to bigger things than your kid's birthday party. You're up to
Exactly.
bigger things than your
Yes.
grandmother's funeral. You're
Yes.
up to, and look, it's not across the board. There's lots of center managers and things that aren't, don't participate in those kind of behaviors, but it's enough in the culture of the organization that it's more there than not there.
Right. There
And
isn't something more important than this.
exactly. And so, as a staff member, particularly, yes, folks, you do become very isolated from any non graduates because, if nothing else, functionally, you simply do not have time. You're one day off a week. You are so exhausted. You're sleeping, eating, and drinking. That's pretty much it. Like, your whole social circle, everything becomes this world. So, it is that's another big misnomer is like, no, Landmark encourages you to get in communication. No, they encourage you to call and complete, which is basically bully and freak out your family. And which also becomes isolating. The amount of people that have been cut off from their relatives from because they've had these weirdo completion conversations that don't make any sense to the person you're calling. And then so they just kind of drift out of your life. It's very isolating. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of show for any Landmark folks listening, like the isolation isn't just you have to live on this compound and there's a gate and you can't get off. It
No.
comes
It's
in
not
much
it's
more subtle
psychological.
ways. And
It's mostly
psychological and it's
psychological. That yeah, I
functional.
mean, there are compounds and cult places where they literally physically isolate you, but that's not Landmark. Landmark is
Mm-mm.
isolating you internally with language, with special language, with us versus them conditioning, with we're better than everybody else. You know, the transformation thing, the whole L. I mean, they have their own way of isolation, but it's a psychological operation.
Yeah. Okay, so
And
what was the next one? So there
as we
was
know from Scientology, right? I mean, there aren't mental barriers that are stronger than physical ones. The prison of belief is the ultimate prison. And this is why that loop of rationalization that we get ourselves involved in is so harmful to us because we're trapping ourselves in a series of ideas that limit our thinking.
we're
Right?
unknowingly trapping ourselves. I just wanna put that
Well,
in because
absolutely
yeah,
unknowingly. Who
we
would
don't
who
know
would
that's
do it
happening.
purposefully? Nobody, right? We do it because we slowly, gradually convince ourselves that this is the good thing to do, and this is the good thing to do. This is the good thing to do, and it's no different than Breaking Bad in some ways. You know, you don't arrive at drug lord in 24 hours. You gradually get there. It's step by step by step. It's the boiling frog thing, and this is how when you can't see it, you can't sit there and say, "Well, it's not happening to me." Of course, you don't think it is, but it is, and it's
Well,
only
and
the
those
long
of
term
you
look back, that when you have your moral awakening and you go, "Oh," right, that's when it all becomes clear. And unfortunately, this is again part of the challenge of communicating about this.
well, and it really one of the things we run into a lot in, like, the Facebook commentary and stuff is, people who did some programs or maybe did some programs and volunteered for even years at a time. They're like, "Well, yeah, I always thought staff was a bad idea. That's why I never went on it." And they don't realize that they're actually being very insulting. I mean, it's great that they didn't do that. I'm happy they didn't go on staff and experience those kinds of harms. But when you say that, somebody said in a comment thread, I thought it was so brilliant at one time. It's like you're walking into an AA meeting and saying, "Well, I don't have a problem with drinking. I think, I have an occasional whiskey and it's really fun." Don't walk into an AA meeting and do that.
That's right.
You're being and to me, that's an example of how Landmark's doctrine sort of hyper individuality and super responsibility actually turns you into this weird person that unwittingly is insulting in the world. Because no, it's really hard for people to say, "You know what? Yeah, I stayed there for 5 years and my health went to shit. My family disappeared. I became suicidal. I lost myself. Like, I don't know who I am. I thought I was being trained to be the most elite performer in the world. I can't get a job. My nervous system is so jacked up that I can't get a job actually, and I can't work in a normal way. The things I did and learned and was so trained in don't translate into the marketplace. Like, there's so much impact on our staff. Robin's asking the question, what guidance would you give? Yeah, what guidance would you 2 give people to who may be wanting to start untangling the negative impacts of programs that are potentially harmful?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few key things that I would suggest. First off, I would suggest therapeutic interventions, therapy, right? That's great stuff. If you can find somebody who can listen and understand the experience that you had and give you emotion-based, trauma-based therapy, stuff that's going to address what's going on. That would be obviously a wonderful thing to get. It's a little I acknowledge the fact that it's a little hit and miss out there, that psychologists are sometimes not tuned into control dynamics and undue influence and how that works. So it can be difficult, but if you can find the right person, it can be amazing. That's not all there is, though. I cannot, and I just don't ever think that there's a way out of this without understanding what was done to you. I just think
Yeah,
that, and we call this psychoeducation or learning, but it's getting your wits around the nature of the work and what it really is. Like differentiating Dianetics from hypnotism, like
right.
understanding that. That wasn't something I realized when I was in, that all the words prevented me from understanding that. It was impossible for me to ever understand that I was being covertly hypnotized. I had to get out of the situation and have somebody explain that to me to go, "Oh, that's how that works." And then, read about 50 articles on hypnotism. And then I'm like, oh, I get it now. But it took that much kind of work to take that apart. And there isn't For me, I'm a kind of, needy, nerdy, geeky, booky guy. I've always have been, so maybe that's my thing, and maybe this isn't everybody's thing, but I really truly believe that trying to put it all in a closet or a box and throw it in the attic is not the way to go. I really think confronting and dealing with what happened to us is the way to get out of and break free from it, and that's my approach. That's how I deal with it.
That's It's
So
so important what you're saying because I have so many people who they're like, "Well, I left. I got it. The organization's bad. I survived. I've learned, had some more self-care. I now eat healthy." Because first thing that a former staffer deals with is they're physically very unhealthy.
that's for sure.
I don't
Yeah,
know a
yeah,
one, myself
yeah,
included, I don't know a one that it does not have to first put their physical health back together. And
absolutely.
then to an extent where you can start to work on the mental stuff. Then the advice that Chris gave me, folks, about stop using the language is fantastic
Yeah,
because it's a really simple way that starts you going, huh, am I really responsible in this? When do I, so because we don't realize how patterned and conditioned we are by those cliches. Then the deconstruction. Deconstruction is uncomfortable. Deconstruction meaning pulling it apart and going, "Wait, where's this response coming from?" We had this is what the Healthy Healing Group has been so great because we come to the calls and Rachel, she's hilarious. My favorite thing ever, she said at one point we were explaining transformation to her and we were using the whole like caterpillar to a butterfly and you become nothing for a while and la la la. And she's so great. She paces through this and this whole thing. She goes, "But what if I wanted to be a caterpillar?" And we all went, "What?" But then it led to this great conversation where we realized we'd all been very conditioned, indoctrinated into this idea that to be a worthwhile human, you had to be up to transformation. You had to, whether it was transforming yourself, the world, your family, whatever, but you had to be becoming something else or you were just kind of a nothing. You were a nobody. And that's really reinforced on staff because I love my friend Lindsay, who's hosting or featuring a series she's doing fantastic, folks, called Children of the Forum, where she's really looking at the impacts on people who get exposed to this stuff before the brain is fully developed and before
yeah.
their identity is fully formulated. And that's a whole other story. And folks, listen to Children of the Forum. It's amazing. But because they don't have an identity to go back to. Their whole
Yeah,
identity
it's
was formulated
a
inside. I mean,
trickier
you're one of
thing.
those, right? It's
Yeah, it's a
definitely
trickier
trickier.
thing.
So the trauma doesn't go away. We now understand this. It actually, um, this is overly simplistic, but gets worse. What do I mean by that? The symptoms of it, as it were, if we were to think of it, it's not really, I don't like thinking it disease, but I can't think of another metaphor. But you get more reactive. Your life kind of gets smaller and smaller as you protect yourself more and more, from the nervous system hijacks from, if you're not working on digesting, integrating, learning, healing, it gets worse. I saw this in my mother. My mother died one day before her 70th birthday. While cancer is the official disease that killed her, I saw her from her mid-50s. Her life got more and more smaller, smaller, more and more isolating. And it was really because it was never available to her to do any kind of real trauma healing. And she got involved. She never got involved with landmarks. She did come do the programs, but she got super involved with context and a variety of other things, religion and so on. But she was always trying to deal with all that was going on in her nervous system from her early years of having been raped and abused and all kinds
Mm,
of terrible things.
yeah.
Folks, just going away, I mean, I just got news for you. Just going away, doesn't do good. So many people say to
It's
me, "I took what was good and I left the rest." Is that possible? Oh, that's a good question, Lindsay.
it is a good question because it helps. It actually, let me say this, a few principles here. One, comparison's the thief of joy. We should not be comparing each of us to the rest of us when it comes
Mhm.
to the recovery path. I really, really, really can't stress this enough. Just because something works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Just because something worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody else. We are not all the same, and we don't all respond the same to different things. So when I say, go get some therapy, yeah, but different, you gotta do that individually for you, right? I say
Right.
I throw out a couple modalities, but there's only about 300 of them. So get the one that works for you, or the ones that work for you. It's not just a matter of one thing. In other words, you as an individual need to walk your path out of what you ran into, and you can only use other people's experiences as maybe guideposts or markers, but not that's your path.
Right.
So the answer to the question is yes, for some people they can just walk away and not think about it again, and actually they're fine. But there are other people who are not that way, and it's not a matter of they're better than you, or they're
Mm,
worse than you, or they're in denial and you're not, or
gotcha.
don't
That's
even
good.
worry about them. That's my point. Worry about you.
Mm,
And if what they're doing is helpful to you, then do it. And if it's not, or confusing to you, or you go, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, then that's not your path. That's all. That's all that means. I think that's really important to have clear here, because this the cult is the thing that's trying to make everybody the same, and is trying to
right.
treat everybody the same, and is trying to assembly line transformation. And yet the truth is that each one of us are, as individuals, our DNA and our fingerprints and everything else. We're all different. So
Right.
our path out of what was done to us is going to be different, because the effects of what was done to us will be different, right? Some people get hit harder by things, and some people literally have experiences where they physically get hit harder than
Right.
other people, right? So it's that kind of an approach and attitude in this work. And Anne's mentioned a couple of times, and it really is a very, very important point, to drop the language, stop talking in the cliches and mantras of the group. Because the reason that's important is because it locks your brain into ways of thinking. And over time, you've been conditioned into ways of thinking that lock you into these
Right.
channels. And what that does is it's channels, not choices. It's removing your choices. You shouldn't
Right.
be locked into channels. You should be making choices about things like your recovery. So, and things like transformation. So I think that's an
And
important
go
thing to know.
part of the choices too, like, is because I see this a lot, there's this whole comment thread going on in this est graduate group right now on Facebook, and it's really interesting actually. Um, people have a lot of different things, but one of the things I keep seeing is I go, "Well, in my experience, Landmark wasn't a cult. In my experience, my Landmark," and I'm like, "Okay, how much have you educated yourself about what a cult is?" Like, go find experts. And that's when the folks around Werner first started coming to me for help, coaching, help on how to, and they didn't tell me straight out at first what was going on. They kind of implied a couple things, well, I'm like, well, if what you're implying to me is that you're being physically hurt, you should call the police. You should get to safety and call the police. If that practice of, taking your pay, these things are outlined in my book, is you're asking me if it's illegal? Well, I'm not a lawyer in that country. You should go find a lawyer that does not have any connection to Landmark or Warner or any of that. And because that's the other thing, we stay insular, we stay inside the group where so we think we're talking to an outside expert, but if it's an outside, even if they have the outside expertise, but they've been fully indoctrinated into the ideology, that's not getting an outside opinion. You've got to get outside. This really great academic that studies and teaches about systems told me one time, the only way to see a system is to get outside of it. The only way to actually see a system is to be outside of that system and fully see it.
Agreed.
So go talk. If you're wondering, is it a cult? Go start reading up from some cult experts, not just Gemini folks on Google. Go look up Steve Hassan's BART model. Look at Lifton's, undue influence model.
That's right.
Listen to Chris's channel. And, I've gravitated towards people that sort of honor that there is value in the work that, various things that we've done, and there's problems. It's complicated. It's not black and white. All right, so I promised folks, how do we find safe places to be in community as we untangle? Well, I'll do a little shameless plug. That's one of the things that it's not much of a plug since it's all free, but that's one of the things that we've tried to create, right? So we've created a Facebook group that has got this, it's the same name as my book. Is This a Cult? It's a private Facebook group. You have to kind of pass through some screening so we know you're ready to hear and see. We're not screening you for us. We're screening you for you. But are you ready to know about some of the more scary, icky things that actually happen? So but you want to start seeking communities of other people that have left or are leaving or are questioning. That's where I would start. Our healthy healing group with Rachel, which is done on a sliding scale. So people, we're very committed to not having it be the cost being an impediment to anybody. There's lots of groups, the Aftermath Foundation, there's, all kinds of groups. So look for places where people are also untangling.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and then I
There's
would
a lot of
add to
support groups
that,
out there. Lots
yeah,
of
there's some
social media groups
expertise
and
in there
stuff.
too.
Yeah,
That's why I
that's
went and
right.
got Rachel, because I was like, I was drowning and I'm like, "Whoa, I don't have the expertise to deal with all this and it's overwhelming my system." So I went and got experts and said, "Okay, come on. Let's set up some systems that are easy access." And everybody I know, you did the same thing. Former Scientologists, there's all kinds of groups that you
That's
can
right.
work with now.
That's right.
Religion rescue groups. I love Jim Palmer's religion rescue stuff.
Exactly. And people are starting to recognize the traumatic effects of these things, so
Right. Okay, so I promised people a little bit of landmark Scientology. So we've got about 20 minutes left here in the time we had allotted for this. So I thought it'd be kind of fun because one of the things that happens a lot in my conversations with Chris is I'm like going along, or maybe I'm listening to his podcast or something. I texted him last week because you and John Atack were having a whole conversation, and turns out be do have is a Scientology thing. Like, what the fuck, man?
it
That's a
is.
landmark thing. No, it's a Scientology thing. So I thought we'd kind of have a little bit of fun. So let's just start with that one. Be do have. Is that
Well, that's the conditions of existence, which are very fundamental in Scientology to how Hubbard says we operate, right? We assume a beingness so as to execute a doingness in order to have a havingness. Hubbard loved those words. And so that's kind of the basic principle.
the whole new realms of possibility that you invent? So one of the many transitions. So I was in Landmark long enough to see it reinvent itself at least 3 times, I think. But they always end up back in the same place. So I think reinvention might be being used a little lightly, and they're currently doing that now. We're reinventing ourselves. No, they're not. I mean, they kind of are. I mean, they're doing programs online now, right? So whatever. But they're not actually examining the distinctions in a deep way. But it was all about you invent a new possibility. Possibilities were always possibilities of being, right? So I'm inventing a possibility of being, the idea being that how I'm being opens me up to what actions I'm taking, new actions impact the results, which also Newfield, they have their whole model too. Theirs is a little more on point in where Werner went in the Being a Leader course, which is my actions are based on how I'm seeing things, how I'm observing things. So how I observe it, how I see it impacts my actions. My actions impact my results. Okay, that's pretty basic. But the thing that all these models always leave out is emotion, the role of emotions. So, hey, folks. Due to some technical issues, we had a kind of an abrupt end to the live. So I'm recording this little outro. Thanks everybody who joined us. Thanks everybody who listens in later. I really am committed to making myself available to answer questions. So as you're listening to this, please feel free, whether it's on the Patreon channel or my YouTube channel, I will be posting this on both. Please feel free to post any questions you have in the comments. I will probably be doing a few more of these on Patreon for sure. We're going to be doing a once a month live for those of you that are Patreon subscribers, where we're going to go into some of these ideas and see, well, what is helpful and what is harmful? What have we learned that we can add into some of these teachings and ideas? So please consider coming over to Patreon Beyond the Line and becoming a subscriber, supporting this work. It really makes a difference. And I appreciate you being here today. Thank you. Till next time.